So how to choose between custom column and Power Query editor versus calculated column using DAX? That's a good question. We get that a lot. We've done a few videos on that as well. I know a lot of people have blogged about opinions on that as well. So Jason, John, what are your thoughts on this topic?
In general, if you can do things further upstream, you probably should. That's a general principle. But when it comes down to that,
define upstream.
So I would call a calculation in DAX further downstream, right?
Okay.
It's kind of more toward the end user. So if I could do something, if I'm pulling data from SQL, for example, I might want to do stuff in a view as opposed to even doing it in either one of those places. If I can make that data, it's going to be more responsive. It's going to be a little easier downstream. Now, the whole point of Power BI, of course, is to be able to deal with data where you don't have that type of control, or that's not necessarily the whole point, but it's one of the benefits. So you may not have those options. But if you can do things, in this case, again, further upstream, you should. So in that principle, if I have a choice and I can't tell the difference of whether or not I should do it in Power Query or in DAX, I'm going to do it in Power Query because I'm not taking up compute resources every time I render that report to calculate that. It's just sitting there as static data. Now, that's also going to be taking perhaps a little more data space in the model. So if that's a consideration, that's something you want to think about. But as a general principle, I'll just come back to it. I tend to push any kind of calculations for the furthest upstream we can go. Obviously, if you're working across rows, that's a DAX thing. But if you're dealing with columns, yeah, I mean, you kind of have a bit of a toss-up. It depends on what you want to. That's really what it boils down to.
Nice.
I love Matthew's comment here. Data should be transformed as far upstream as possible and as far downstream as necessary.
That's excellent, actually.
It's a great,
awesome way to say
great answer. Awesome. To the question that Adam asked, like where's the stream, right? Like how do you define upstream versus downstream? The way that I think about this is from the data source is the beginning to the end user's desktop is the end, right? So as you continue to go down, you can't see my hands because they're off screen at this point, but as you continue to move down that ETL process, right, all of the calculations that are happening in Power Query are happening before the DAX calculations. So that's considered upstream, right? So that I ran into this recently at work where folks they know DAX. DAX is easy and easy. Sorry, I do the finger quotes around that because it's not easy, but it's maybe considered easier than writing M, right? At least it's easier to Google for. But people are very comfortable in DAX at this point, so they want to do everything there, but it becomes less efficient, because if we could do those calculations in M before that, we get optimization, and that's really what we want to do. We want to take it out of the hands of the user where they have to process that operation every time. So,
yep. And it's not that we're lazy; we're just efficient.
Yeah. Right? I like that.
Yes. So
I'm gonna tell my wife that.
Yes. There's shirts you can get that say that. So yeah. So the other thing we talk about is where do you want to pay for the actual process of doing that, right? So if we put that down at the SQL server, it's going to be, we're pushing that cost of doing that operation to the SQL server, right? We're not paying that cost on, whether it be the gateway or the Power BI service or from a query perspective, right? So it's like where you're going to pay it somewhere. So where do you want to do that?
Ain't no such thing as a free lunch.
Right. Yep. Right. So, and sometimes, if you bring that up to the DAX side or the Power Query side, you could potentially pay a higher cost on that than if you were to push that back to the data source, if that's even something that's an option for you, right? So if you don't have access to that data source, or the data source doesn't, like if it's a CSV file, like you don't have control over that, obviously you're going to have to do that on the Power Query or DAX side. So where do you want to pay for that?
There's another comment in here. Don't call custom columns break query folding. Bingo. I mean, that's a consideration right there, and that's by the way another case for going further upstream.
Yeah, let's see that.
The important thing is that we don't cross the streams, though. Never cross
the streams.
Important safety tip.
Yes, never cross the streams. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Alex is disagreeing. Oh, he says Alex says custom columns can fold. I would agree with that. I would also say it depends, right? So it depends on where in the process you do it and what exactly you're doing in the item, right? Because
if I'm working with direct query, that's really what I was referring to.
Oh yeah, no, yeah,
I don't want to touch.
Don't do that in direct query for sure. Now, one thing I will say, like Patrick and I have done this too, where we took we created a full name column using the column by example, so it's a custom column that absolutely gets folded back to the SQL Server. So I've actually seen that. So as with all things, it depends.